Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
I thought my family was my safe haven until the day I found out the unimaginable. My wife was having an affair with my brother, and my parents had known all along. Their betrayal was gut-wrenching, but what came next was even worse. They told me to think about the kids and act like nothing had happened. As if that wasn't enough, they later asked me to share my inheritance with my brother, the same man who destroyed my marriage. Looking back, the signs were there. I just didn't see them, or maybe I didn't want to. At the time, I thought my wife, Rachel, and I were happy. We had built a good life together. Two wonderful kids, a cozy home, and a routine that felt solid and dependable. My younger brother, Mark, was a big part of that life. He had always been close to us, dropping by to help with the kids, hang out for dinner, or watch a game with me in the living room. At first, it seemed normal. Mark was my brother, and I trusted him implicitly. Rachel and he got along well, laughing at inside jokes and teaming up to keep our kids entertained during family gatherings. I never questioned it. Why would I? Family was everything to me, and I had no reason to believe that bond could ever be broken. But everything I thought I knew came crashing down the day I got a message from a friend. I don't know how to tell you this. They wrote, but I've seen Rachel and Mark together. It didn't look innocent. When I first read those words, I laughed out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was so absurd that it couldn't possibly be true. Rachel and Mark? My wife and my brother? The idea was so ridiculous that I didn't even entertain it for more than a moment. I brushed it off as a misunderstanding, a case of someone jumping to conclusions. But that night, as I lay in bed next to Rachel, the thought wouldn't leave me alone. My friend wasn't the type to gossip or stir up drama, and the way they had phrased it, hesitant, almost apologetic, gnawed at me. Finally, I turned to Rachel. Hey, can I ask you something? She looked up from her book, her expression curious. Of course. What's up? I hesitated, then said, I got a weird message today. Someone said they saw you and Mark together and thought it looked off. Her reaction was immediate. She laughed, shaking her head. That's ridiculous. Mark and I are close because he's your brother. People love to read into things that aren't there. Her response was calm and confident, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of unease, that I couldn't ignore. You swear there's nothing going on? I asked. She put her book down and reached for my hand. Of course not. I love you. Whoever sent that message is just trying to cause trouble. Her tears started then, soft but insistent, and they broke down my resolve. I wrapped her in my arms, whispering reassurances. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But even as I comforted her, a seed of doubt had taken root in my mind. Over the next few days, I tried to let it go. I wanted to believe Rachel, and I wanted to believe in my brother. But the doubt lingered, growing stronger every time I saw them together. The way they laughed a little too much at each other's jokes. The way they exchanged quick glances when they thought I wasn't looking. One night, after Rachel went to bed early, I poured myself a drink and sat alone in the living room, my mind racing. Was I being paranoid? Or was there something I wasn't seeing? The tipping point came a few days later. Rachel was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I glanced at it without thinking, and that's when I saw Mark's name. The message preview was innocuous. Can't wait to see you again, but it was enough to send my heart pounding. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the phone. I hated the idea of invading her privacy, but the doubt was suffocating. Taking a deep breath, I unlocked the phone using her passcode, a code I knew because we had always shared everything. What I found shattered me. The text messages between Rachel and Mark left no room for doubt. They weren't just casual chats or friendly banter. The words were intimate, explicit, filled with plans to meet up when I wasn't around. There were mentions of how hard it was to keep things secret and how worth it all felt. My hands trembled as I scrolled through the messages, each one a dagger to my heart. My wife and my brother, the two people I trusted most in the world, had betrayed me in the worst way possible. When Rachel came out of the shower, I was still sitting on the edge of the bed, her phone in my hand. She froze when she saw my face. What's wrong? She asked, her voice trembling. I held up the phone, the message is still on the screen. Care to explain this? Her face went pale, and for a moment, she didn't say anything. Then the tears started again, but this time, they didn't feel genuine. It's not what it looks like, she said, her voice cracking. I stood up, shaking my head. Don't insult my intelligence, Rachel. I read everything. She collapsed onto the bed, sobbing uncontrollably. I'm so sorry, she choked out. It was a mistake. I didn't mean for it to happen. But her words felt hollow, and all I could hear was the sound of my heart breaking. The life I thought I knew, the family I thought I could trust, it was all a lie. The night I confronted Rachel, the air in our bedroom felt heavy, almost suffocating. She sat on the edge of the bed, her face streaked with tears, while I stood across the room, her phone still in my hand. I felt like I was looking at a stranger, not the woman I had spent over a decade building a life with. I need you to be honest with me, I said, my voice steady but barely above a whisper. No more lies, Rachel. Tell me the truth. She broke down completely, sobbing into her hands. I'm so sorry, she choked out. I never wanted this to happen. It was a mistake, a horrible mistake. Hearing her admit, it felt like the ground beneath me had crumbled. I tried to process her words, but they sounded hollow, as if they couldn't possibly apply to my life. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice trembling. Rachel hesitated, her gaze darting toward the floor. A few months, she finally admitted. But it's over now. I swear. I ended it weeks ago. Her words didn't bring me any comfort. Weeks ago? I said, my voice rising. So you thought you could just sweep it under the rug and pretend nothing happened? She reached out for me, but I took a step back. Please, she begged. It was a mistake. I wasn't thinking clearly. I love you and I love our family. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. But I couldn't look at her the same way anymore. The person I thought I knew, the person I had trusted with my heart, had shattered that trust beyond repair. The next day, I confronted Mark. I drove to his apartment, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly they ached. I wasn't sure what I expected, an apology, an explanation, maybe even some sign of remorse. When he opened the door, his expression was calm, almost bored. I figured you'd come by, he said, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't waste any time. What the hell is wrong with you? I demanded. You slept with my wife, Mark. My wife. Do you have any idea what you've done? He shrugged, leaning against the wall. I know it's messed up, okay? But it's not like I planned this. Things just happened. Things just happened. I repeated, incredulous. You didn't just happen to betray your brother. This wasn't an accident, Mark. This was a choice, a series of choices. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry if it hurt you, but Rachel and we connected. It wasn't about you. His lack of remorse made my blood boil. Not about me? I shouted. You betrayed me, Mark. You betrayed your own family. How can you stand there and act like this isn't a big deal? But he didn't flinch. Instead, he shrugged again and said, Look, I know you're pissed, but I can't change what happened. You'll move on eventually. I thought telling my parents would bring some kind of justice, that they would be horrified and hold Mark accountable for what he had done. But when I sat them down and explained everything, their reaction left me speechless. My mom shook her head, her expression full of disappointment, but not at Mark. He made a mistake, she said, her tone almost patronizing. He's your brother. You can't let this ruin your relationship. I stared at her, waiting for her to say something more, something that acknowledged the gravity of what had happened. But she didn't. My dad leaned forward, his hands clasped in front of him. Think about the kids, he said. They need their family to stay together. This isn't worth tearing everyone apart over. Tearing everyone apart? I repeated, my voice shaking with disbelief. Mark and Rachel already did that. How can you expect me to just move on like nothing happened? My mom placed a hand on my arm, as if trying to comfort me. Families make mistakes, she said. But we're stronger than this. You and Mark have always been so close. Don't let this one thing ruin everything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This one thing is my marriage, I said, pulling away from her. This is my life, Mom. Mark didn't just make a mistake. He destroyed everything I thought I could count on, but they didn't seem to understand. Or maybe they didn't want to. My mom kept talking about forgiveness, about how I needed to be the bigger person, while my dad emphasized the importance of family unity. By the time I left their house, I felt more betrayed than ever. Not only had Mark and Rachel destroyed my trust, but my parents were asking me to sacrifice my own feelings for the sake of keeping the peace. It was as if my pain didn't matter, as long as the illusion of a happy family was preserved. In the days following my confrontation with Rachel and Mark, I couldn't stop replaying everything in my mind. Each memory felt like a puzzle piece that no longer fit the picture I had thought was my life. And as I dwelled on the details, I began to notice things that didn't add up, strange moments and half-explained stories from the past year. I remember the times Rachel had told me she was meeting my mom for coffee, only to come home hours later, claiming they'd lost track of time. Or the times Mark had coincidentally shown up at family events Rachel attended when I was away for work. It wasn't until now that I realized how often my parents had been part of those explanations. Driven by suspicion, I started digging deeper. I called my mom one afternoon, trying to sound casual. "Hey, do you remember that day a couple of months ago when Rachel said she was meeting you for lunch? Did you guys go anywhere special?" There was a brief pause before my mom answered. "Oh, yes, of course. We went to that little cafe downtown." "Why?" Her response was too quick, too rehearsed. My stomach churned. "I see," I said, keeping my voice steady. "I was just curious. Rachel came home with a new scarf that day. Did you help her pick it out?" Another pause, longer this time. "I don't remember," she said, her tone hesitant. "You know how Rachel loves shopping. Maybe she got it before we met up." That conversation left me more unsettled than before. Something was off, and I needed answers. I decided to confront my parents directly, hoping that face-to-face, they wouldn't be able to dodge the truth. When I arrived at their house, they were sitting together in the living room, sipping tea like it was any other day. I wasted no time. "How long have you known about Rachel and Mark?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. My mom's face paled, and she exchanged a nervous glance with my dad. "What are you talking about?" she asked, feigning confusion. "Don't play dumb," I snapped. "I know you've been covering for them. How long has this been going on?" My dad sighed, setting his cup down with exaggerated care. "Okay," he said, his tone calm but firm. "We knew, but it's not what you think." His words hit me like a brick. "You knew?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You knew my wife was cheating on me with my brother, and you didn't think I deserved to know." My mom leaned forward, her hands clasped together as if she were pleading. "We didn't want to hurt you," she said. "We thought it was a phase, something they'd realize was a mistake and stop. We didn't think it was worth tearing the family apart over something like this." Her words felt like a slap to the face. "Something like this?" I echoed, my voice trembling with anger. "This isn't some minor mistake, Mom. This is my marriage, my family. How could you stand by and let this happen?" "We didn't let it happen," my dad interjected, his tone defensive. "We try to talk to them, to make them see sense. But it's not our place to control their actions. We were trying to protect you." "Protect me?" I shouted. "You weren't protecting me. You were protecting them. You lied to me, covered for them, and now you're acting like it's my fault for being upset. Do you even hear yourselves?" My mom started crying, but her tears did nothing to soften my anger. "We didn't know what to do," she said between sobs. "We thought we were doing the right thing by keeping the peace. Families make mistakes, but we're supposed to forgive each other and move on." My dad nodded in agreement. "That's what families do," he said. "We stick together, even when things get messy. Holding on to anger won't solve anything. You need to focus on what's best for the kids." Hearing those words, "think about the kids," was the final straw. "Don't you dare bring my kids into this," I said, my voice shaking with fury. "You're using them as an excuse to justify your betrayal. What kind of example does this set for them? That lying and cheating are okay as long as you keep the peace." Neither of them had an answer. My mom looked away, her hands trembling, while my dad simply stared at me with a look of quiet resignation. When I left their house that day, I felt a mix of rage, heartbreak, and disbelief. It wasn't just about Rachel or Mark anymore. It was about my parents, the people I had trusted most in the world, betraying me in a way I never thought possible. They hadn't just failed me. They had actively chosen to side with the people who had hurt me. And now, they expected me to forgive and forget, to prioritize family unity over my own pain. But how could I? How could I forgive a betrayal that cut this deep? And how could I ever look at my parents the same way again? The fallout from the betrayal was like a bomb going off in my life, and the shrapnel spread far and wide. My refusal to forgive and forget was treated by some in the family as the real problem, as if my unwillingness to sweep everything under the rug was somehow worse than the betrayal itself. Mark quickly positioned himself as the victim, spinning the narrative to anyone who would listen. "I've apologized," he told one of our cousins at a family barbecue I chose not to attend. "But he refuses to move on. It's like he wants to punish me forever." Rachel, on the other hand, played the role of the repentant spouse to perfection. She called me constantly, begging for us to go to therapy together. "We can fix this," she said during one call. "We owe it to the kids to try. Don't you think they deserve a family?" Her words stung, but not for the reasons she thought. I had already considered the impact this would have on my children, and it broke my heart. But staying together with Rachel, pretending everything was fine, would have been worse. I refused to set that example for my kids, to show them that betrayal could be swept under the rug in the name of family. My parents, however, saw things differently. They seemed determined to drag me back into the fold, no matter how much it cost me emotionally. My mom was relentless, calling almost every day with some new argument for why I needed to forgive Mark and Rachel. "Your brother is struggling," she said during one call. "He knows he made a mistake, and he's hurting too. How long are you going to hold this against him?" "And Rachel?" I shot back. "What about her? Or are you just going to pretend she's not equally responsible?" "She's trying," my mom said weakly. "She's reaching out. That's more than I can say for you." Every family gathering became a battlefield. Relatives took sides, with some supporting my decision to cut Mark and Rachel out of my life, and others insisting I needed to move on for the sake of the kids. The tension was unbearable, and I found myself avoiding family events altogether. The ones who supported me often reached out in private. "You're doing the right thing," my cousin Emily said during a coffee meetup. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." But even their support couldn't drown out the chorus of voices telling me to forgive and forget. It was exhausting trying to explain over and over again that this wasn't just about the affair. It was about the complete betrayal of trust, not just by Rachel and Mark, but by my parents too. The breaking point came when my mom called me one evening, her voice trembling with emotion. "You're tearing this family apart," she said, barely able to contain her tears. "Is that what you want? To destroy the family over one mistake?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, not because I believed them, but because they revealed just how twisted her perspective had become. "One mistake," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Mom, this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice, a deliberate, ongoing choice by Mark and Rachel to betray me. And you knew about it. You helped them hide it. How can you call that one mistake?" "We were trying to protect you," she said, her voice defensive. "No, you were trying to protect them," I snapped. "And now you're trying to make me feel guilty for not going along with it." "I won't do it, Mom. I won't pretend everything is fine just to make you feel better." Her sobs grew louder, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered the months of lies, the nights I had spent doubting myself while they all conspired behind my back. I realized that my guilt was exactly what she was counting on to bring me back in line. From that point on, I stopped answering her calls as often. I needed space, not just from Mark and Rachel, but from my parents too. Their refusal to acknowledge the damage they had caused, their insistence that I sacrifice my feelings for the sake of family, made it impossible to have a real conversation. I knew my decision to cut ties would have consequences, and it did. My absence at family events became a constant topic of discussion, with Mark and Rachel conveniently framing it as proof of my pettiness and immaturity. My dad, always the pragmatist, tried a different approach, calling to remind me of all the good times we had shared as a family. "You're not just punishing them," he said. "You're punishing all of us. Don't let your anger ruin everything." But I wasn't the one ruining everything. I was simply refusing to let their actions define my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was doing what was best for me, even if it meant standing alone. A week after my mom's tearful phone call, I received an invitation to dinner at my parents' house. The message was unusually formal, more of a request than a casual invite. My mom's text read, "We'd like to have a family discussion. Please come by this Sunday. It's important." I hesitated before replying. Part of me wanted to refuse outright, knowing that every recent interaction with them had left me angrier and more drained. But a small part of me hoped this might be different. Maybe they were finally ready to take responsibility for their actions, or, at the very least, offer a genuine apology. Against my better judgment, I agreed. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the house was strangely tense. My mom greeted me at the door with a strained smile, while my dad sat at the dining table, flipping through a stack of papers. Mark wasn't there, thankfully, and I hoped it meant the conversation would stay civil. We started with small talk over dinner, though it was clear no one was really paying attention. My parents seemed distracted, exchanging quiet glances as if they were waiting for the right moment to bring up whatever was on their minds. Finally, after the dishes were cleared, my mom leaned forward, clasping her hands together. "We've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," she began, and we wanted to talk to you about something important." I sat back in my chair, wary. "Okay, I'm listening." My dad cleared his throat, glancing at my mom before continuing. "You know that Mark's been struggling financially lately. He's had some setbacks, and things haven't been easy for him." I felt my stomach drop, a sense of foreboding washing over me. "What does that have to do with me?" "Well, My mom said, her tone careful. We were thinking that, since you've been doing well for yourself, maybe you could help him out? I blinked, unsure if I had heard her correctly. Help him out? How exactly? She hesitated, then said, by sharing some of your inheritance. Mark could really use the support right now. For a moment, I just stared at her, waiting for her to realize how absurd the request was. But her expression remained earnest, as if this were a perfectly reasonable thing to ask. You're asking me to share my inheritance, I said slowly, with the man who destroyed my marriage? My mom sighed, as if I were the one being unreasonable. It's not about what happened between you and Mark, she said. This is about family. Emily would have wanted you to support your brother. The mention of Emily's name was like a slap in the face. Don't you dare bring Emily into this, I snapped. You don't get to use her memory to guilt me into giving Mark money. My dad stepped in then, his voice calm but firm. We're not trying to guilt you, he said. We just think it's the right thing to do. Mark made a mistake, but he's still your brother. Family takes care of each other. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Family? You're seriously talking to me about family after everything Mark has done? After everything you've done? My mom's eyes filled with tears, but I was too angry to care. Do you have any idea how insulting this is? I continued. You didn't just stand by while Mark and Rachel betrayed me. You helped them. You lied to me, covered for them. And now you expect me to reward Mark with money. It's not a reward, my dad said, his tone growing sharper. It's about doing what's fair. You've had a lot of opportunities, and Mark hasn't been as lucky. This could help him get back on his feet. Fair? I repeated, my voice rising. You think this is about fairness? What's fair about what Mark did to me? What's fair about you siding with him and Rachel instead of supporting me? My mom reached for my hand, but I pulled away. We're not taking sides, she said, her voice trembling. We just want to keep the family together. Can't you see that this isn't worth losing each other over? I stood up, unable to sit there any longer. You're right, I said, my voice shaking. This isn't worth losing each other over. But that's exactly what's happening, because you refuse to see how wrong this is. You're so desperate to protect Mark that you're willing to throw me under the bus. Well, I'm done playing along. My mom started to cry as I grabbed my coat, but I didn't look back. As I walked out the door, my dad called after me, his voice stern. Think about what we said. This isn't just about you. But that was the problem. It never had been. In their eyes, my pain, my betrayal, and my boundaries didn't matter. All that mattered was maintaining the illusion of a happy, united family, no matter how broken it really was. As I drove home, a cold, hard realization settled over me. I couldn't keep hoping my parents would change. They had made their choice, and it wasn't me. The conversation about sharing my inheritance with Mark was the tipping point, the moment I realized just how deeply entrenched my parents were in their delusions about family unity. For them, it wasn't about right or wrong. It was about preserving the status quo, no matter the cost to me. That night, as I sat in my living room replaying their words, I felt a clarity I hadn't felt in months. I had spent so much time trying to explain myself to people who didn't want to understand, who only cared about maintaining their narrative. But I was done. For the first time, I decided to draw a line. I wasn't going to let their guilt trips or manipulative tactics control me anymore. If they couldn't acknowledge the harm they had caused, then I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. The next day, I called my mom. She answered on the second ring, her voice tentative. Hi, sweetheart, she said, as if nothing had happened. We need to talk, I said, my tone firm, and I need you to listen. There was a pause on the other end of the line before she said, Of course. What's on your mind? I need space, I said plainly. I can't keep having these conversations with you, or Dad, until you're willing to take responsibility for what you've done, for the role you played in covering for Mark and Rachel. I can't be part of this family dynamic anymore. Her response was immediate. What do you mean? Take responsibility? We've already apologized. What more do you want from us? It's not just about apologizing, I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. It's about acknowledging the harm you caused and respecting the boundaries I'm setting. You can't keep pushing me to forgive Mark or pretending this didn't happen. And you definitely can't expect me to give him money. Her tone grew defensive. You're being unfair. We're trying to move forward as a family, and you're the one holding on to the past. Don't you see how much this is hurting everyone else? No, Mom, I said sharply. This isn't about everyone else. This is about me. I've spent months trying to explain my pain to you, and you've done nothing but dismiss it. I can't keep doing this. She started crying, but I didn't back down. I'm not cutting you off, I said, but I won't be attending family events or having these conversations until things change. I need time to heal. And I can't do that while you're constantly pushing me to prioritize everyone else's feelings over my own. When I hung up, I felt a mix of relief and guilt. Part of me wondered if I had been too harsh, but another part knew this was the only way forward. My dad called me later that evening, his tone angrier than I'd ever heard before. "What's this nonsense about you needing space?" he demanded. "It's not nonsense," I said calmly. I told Mom the same thing. "I need space to heal, and I need you to respect that." "Respect?" he snapped. "You think this is about respect? You're acting like a child, punishing us because you're too stubborn to let this go. Do you know how selfish you're being?" "Selfish?" I repeated, my voice rising. "I'm not the one who betrayed my family. I'm not the one who lied and covered for Mark and Rachel. And I'm definitely not the one who's been ignoring your pain for months. You want to talk about selfish? Look in the mirror." He fell silent for a moment, then said, "You're being cruel, and you're tearing this family apart. Is that what you want?" "No," I said firmly. "What I want is to be treated with respect. But until that happens, I'm not coming back." After that call, I stopped responding to their messages as often. I told my brother James, who had been trying to stay neutral, about my decision. "I just can't do it anymore," I said. "I can't keep putting their needs above my own." James sighed heavily. "I get it," he said, "but they're not going to take this well. You know that, right?" "I know," I said, "but it's not my job to make them feel better about what they've done." The weeks that followed were both freeing and painful. I missed the family I thought I had, the version of them I had spent years idealizing. But I didn't miss the constant guilt trips, the endless pressure to forgive and forget. I focused on rebuilding my life, one step at a time. I started therapy, something I've been putting off for months, and found it to be a lifeline. My therapist helped me unpack the layers of betrayal I had experienced, not just from Rachel and Mark, but from my parents as well. Through therapy, I learned that drawing boundaries wasn't selfish. It was necessary. I couldn't control how my parents reacted to my choices, but I could control how much access they had to my life. For the first time in months, I felt like I was prioritizing my own healing. And while the road ahead was still uncertain, I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let anyone else dictate how I moved forward. During the weeks of silence between my parents and me, I reconnected with an old friend, Lisa. We hadn't spoken in years, but she reached out after seeing a vague post I had made online about feeling betrayed by people I thought I could trust. "Hey," her message read, "I don't know what you're going through, but if you ever want to talk, I'm here." Lisa and I had been close in college, and while life had pulled us in different directions, I remembered her as someone who always spoke her mind. It turned out that Lisa had her own story of betrayal, a fiancé who had cheated on her with her best friend. She had been through the fire and come out stronger, and her perspective was exactly what I needed. We met for coffee one afternoon, and what started as small talk quickly turned into a deep, honest conversation about betrayal, family dynamics, and the impossible expectations people put on those who have been wronged. "What you're feeling is normal," Lisa said after I unloaded everything about Rachel, Mark, and my parents. "You're angry because you were betrayed, but you're also angry because they're trying to make you the bad guy for not brushing it off." "Exactly," I said, leaning back in my chair. "It's like they don't care about what happened. They just want me to keep the peace so they can pretend everything's fine." Lisa nodded. "That's because it's easier for them. If you forgive and move on, they don't have to deal with the discomfort of admitting they were wrong or facing the consequences of their actions." Her words hit me hard. I had been carrying so much guilt for standing my ground, feeling like I was the one causing the family drama. But Lisa's perspective shifted something inside me. "Some people will do anything to avoid accountability," she continued, "even if it means hurting the people they claim to love. Your parents aren't siding with Mark and Rachel because they think what they did was okay. They're siding with them because it's easier than facing the truth." Her insight felt like a weight lifting off my chest. For months, I had been trying to make sense of my parents' actions, wondering why they seemed more concerned about Mark's feelings than mine. But Lisa helped me see it wasn't really about me. It was about their own inability to handle conflict. "That doesn't make it okay," Lisa added. "But it does mean their behavior isn't about you. It's about them." I thought about her words for days after that coffee meeting. It didn't erase the pain of their betrayal, but it helped me let go of the guilt I had been carrying. I realized that cutting ties with toxic family members wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. Lisa and I kept in touch after that, and her friendship became a lifeline. She had been through her own storm, and she knew how to balance empathy with tough love. "Don't let anyone make you feel guilty for protecting your peace," she told me one day. "You can't pour from an empty cup, and right now, you need to focus on filling yours." With Lisa's encouragement, I started reevaluating the relationships in my life. I realized how much time I had spent bending over backward to keep the family dynamic intact, even when it was hurting me. For the first time, I began to question why I felt obligated to prioritize their comfort over my own well-being. I also started to focus more on my kids, pouring my energy into being present for them and creating a sense of stability in our home. They had been through enough upheaval, and I wanted to show them what healthy boundaries looked like. One evening, as I was helping my daughter with her homework, she looked up and said, "Daddy, you seem happier lately." Her words caught me off guard, but they made me realize just how much the toxic family drama had been weighing on me, and how much lighter I felt now that I was taking steps to protect myself. That wasn't to say everything was perfect. There were still moments when the guilt crept back in, when I wondered if I was being too harsh or if I should try harder to fix things with my parents. But every time I doubted myself, I thought about what Lisa had said. Your boundaries aren't about punishing them. They're about protecting you. With that perspective, I felt more confident in my decision to distance myself from my parents and Mark. I wasn't cutting them off out of spite or anger. I was doing it because I needed to heal. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally starting to put myself first. Rebuilding my life felt like learning to walk again after a long fall. Everything had changed, and I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let the betrayal define me. I began with my kids. They had been my anchor through the storm, and I wanted to be the kind of father they could rely on. I focused on creating a stable, loving environment at home, free from the drama and tension that had consumed my life for so long. I started planning small adventures with them, trips to the park, movie nights, and even baking disasters in the kitchen. Their laughter became a kind of therapy, a reminder that not everything was broken. One evening, as we sat on the couch watching a cartoon, my son leaned his head against my shoulder and said, "I love you, Dad." In that moment, I realized that no matter how much had been taken from me, I still had something precious to hold on to. At the same time, I threw myself into my work. My career had always been a source of pride, but during the chaos of the past year, I had lost some of that spark. Now, I found a renewed sense of purpose in tackling new projects and setting goals that challenged me. Work became an outlet, a way to channel my energy into something productive. It also gave me a sense of control, something I desperately needed after feeling powerless for so long. But rebuilding wasn't just about keeping busy, it was also about healing. I started therapy, something I had been reluctant to try at first. Sitting in that room, talking to a stranger about my pain, felt awkward and vulnerable. But as the sessions went on, I began to see the value in unpacking my emotions in a safe, supportive space. One of the biggest breakthroughs came during a session where my therapist asked me a simple question. What does moving forward look like for you? I sat in silence for a long time, grappling with the question. For months, I had been so consumed by anger and hurt that I hadn't thought about what I wanted for myself. Moving forward, I realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing not to let it control me anymore. With that in mind, I started journaling, pouring my thoughts and feelings onto the page. It was messy at first, a jumble of anger, sadness, and confusion. But over time, the act of writing became a way to process my pain and find clarity. I wrote about the betrayal, about my parents' manipulation, and about the guilt I had carried for so long. But I also wrote about the things I was grateful for, my kids, my resilience, and the friendships that had carried me through. Those pages became a record of my journey, a testament to my strength in the face of unimaginable hurt. As the weeks turned into months, I began to feel like myself again. It wasn't a sudden transformation. There were still hard days when the memories crept in and the wounds felt fresh. But those moments became less frequent, and I learned to sit with the pain without letting it consume me. I also made it clear to my parents that my boundaries were non-negotiable. I wouldn't tolerate any more guilt trips or manipulative attempts to force me into forgiving Mark and Rachel. If they wanted a relationship with me, it had to be on my terms. Surprisingly, they seemed to take my words seriously. My mom stopped pushing me to attend family events, and my dad stopped bringing up the inheritance. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Moving forward didn't mean forgetting what had happened. The scars of the betrayal would always be there, a reminder of the people I had lost and the lessons I had learned. But those scars didn't have to define me. I started focusing on the life I wanted to build, a life where my happiness wasn't tied to anyone else's approval, where my choices were driven by what was best for me and my kids. And slowly but surely, I began to believe that a better future was possible. one where I wasn't just surviving, but thriving. Months passed with minimal contact between me and my parents. It was a strange kind of silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, unresolved kind that lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. I had made my boundaries clear, and while they hadn't pushed me as aggressively as before, I could feel the tension simmering just beneath the surface. One afternoon, seemingly out of nowhere, I got a call from my mom. Her voice sounded hesitant, almost fragile. "Hi, sweetheart," she said. "I was wondering if you'd be open to talking. Just you and me. I think it's time we had a real conversation." I wasn't sure what to expect, but something about her tone convinced me to agree. We set a time to meet at a small cafe near my house. The choice of location felt deliberate, neutral ground, away from the weight of family history. When I arrived, my mom was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands folded tightly in her lap. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mix of relief and nervousness. "Thanks for coming," she said as I sat down. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "You said you wanted to talk." "I'm here." She hesitated, then took a deep breath. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said the last time we talked. About how we handled everything with Mark and Rachel." Her voice wavered slightly, but she pressed on. "You were right. We didn't handle it well. We thought we were protecting the family, but we ended up hurting you instead. And for that, I'm sorry." Her words caught me off guard. For months, I had been waiting for some acknowledgement of the pain they had caused, but hearing it now felt almost surreal. "Thank you for saying that," I said cautiously. "But it's not just about what happened. It's about how you reacted afterward. You didn't just hurt me. You made me feel like my pain didn't matter." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. "I know, and I don't have an excuse for that. We were wrong." The conversation that followed was difficult, but honest. My mom admitted that she and my dad had been scared of losing the family, scared of facing the fallout from Mark's actions, and scared of confronting their own role in what had happened. "We thought we could fix it by keeping things quiet," she said. "But all we did was make it worse." For the first time, I saw genuine remorse in her eyes. It wasn't a perfect apology, and it didn't erase the months of hurt, but it was enough for me to consider taking a small step toward reconciliation. When I asked about my dad, she said he felt the same but didn't know how to express it. "He's not good with words," she said, "but he regrets how things turned out, and he wants to make things right." I agreed to meet with both of them under the condition that we set some ground rules. Mark was not to be involved in any capacity, and there would be no more discussions about forgiving him or thinking about the kids. This was about rebuilding my relationship with my parents, not reopening old wounds. The three of us met a week later at my house. My dad was visibly nervous, fidgeting with his hands as he sat across from me. My mom did most of the talking, reiterating what she had said at the cafe. When she finished, my dad cleared his throat and said, "I know we let you down. I wish I could go back and handle things differently. But all I can do now is say I'm sorry and promise to do better." It wasn't the heartfelt declaration I had imagined in my head, but it felt sincere. And for the first time, I saw how much they had been struggling with their own guilt. "I'm willing to try," I said finally. "But this has to be on my terms. Trust is going to take time to rebuild. And if I feel like you're not respecting my boundaries, I won't hesitate to step back again." They both nodded, and my mom said, "We'll do whatever it takes. We just want to be part of your life again." Rebuilding our relationship wasn't easy. There were moments when old habits crept back in. My mom making subtle comments about family unity or my dad deflecting uncomfortable conversations. But each time, I stood firm, reminding them of the boundaries I had set. Over time, things improved. They stopped pressuring me to reconcile with Mark, and they began to respect my decisions without questioning them. Our conversations became less tense, and while the wounds hadn't fully healed, the sharp edges had started to soften. Coexisting with them felt like a compromise, an imperfect balance between holding on to my boundaries and allowing space for reconciliation. But for now, it was enough. Looking back, I realized that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing what they had done. It meant acknowledging the hurt while choosing not to let it control me anymore. My parents had hurt me deeply, but they were also trying to make amends, and that effort mattered. Rebuilding trust was a slow process, and I knew it would never go back to the way it was before. But maybe that was okay. Maybe the new version of our relationship, built on honesty and mutual respect, could be stronger than the one we had lost. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was ready to move forward, not just for them, but for myself. Today, as I sit in my quiet living room, I feel a sense of peace I never thought I'd have again. The chaos, the anger, and the endless questions have finally settled into something manageable, a memory that no longer holds me hostage. It hasn't been easy, but I've learned that healing is less about forgetting and more about choosing to move forward, even when the past lingers. My relationship with my parents is cautious but functional. We see each other occasionally, mostly during planned visits where the boundaries I've set remain firmly in place. Mark is no longer a part of my life, and my parents have stopped trying to bring him up. It's an unspoken rule that has kept the fragile truce between us intact. There are still moments when I feel the sting of betrayal, but those moments are fewer and farther between. With time, I've learned that trust doesn't always have to be fully restored for a relationship to exist. It just needs to be carefully managed with clear limits and mutual understanding. Letting go of the relationships that no longer serve me was one of the hardest things I've ever done. For years, I had clung to the idea of family as something unbreakable, something worth sacrificing for no matter the cost. But I've come to understand that family isn't about blood. It's about trust, respect, and love. Walking away from Mark and Rachel wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about protecting my kids. They deserve to grow up in an environment where loyalty and honesty are valued, not undermined. And while it hurt to cut ties with people who were once such a central part of my life, it was a necessary step toward creating a healthier future. I've also learned to let go of the guilt that used to weigh me down. For so long, I felt like I was the one tearing the family apart, like I was the villain for standing up for myself. But now, I see that drawing boundaries isn't selfish, it's an act of self-preservation. Forgiveness, I've discovered, doesn't always mean reconciliation. There are some relationships that can't be mended, no matter how much time passes or how many apologies are exchanged. Forgiveness, for me, has been about releasing the grip the past had on my heart, freeing myself from the weight of resentment so I could focus on the life I wanted to build. That life looks different than it did before, but in many ways, it's better. My kids and I have created a new normal, one filled with laughter, love, and stability. I poured my energy into my career, taking on projects that challenge me and remind me of my own resilience. I've also found solace in the friendships I've rebuilt along the way. Lisa remains a close confidant, her wisdom and empathy a guiding light during my darkest moments. And the friends who stood by me through the storm have become like family, proving that true loyalty doesn't depend on shared DNA. Looking back, I'm grateful for the lessons this experience taught me. It showed me the strength I didn't know I had, the importance of boundaries, and the value of putting myself first. It also reminded me that life is messy and imperfect, and that's okay. There's still a long road ahead, but I'm no longer afraid of what lies ahead. I've learned that moving forward doesn't mean erasing the pain of the past. It means carrying those lessons with you as you build something new. And today, as I watch my kids play in the backyard, their laughter echoing through the house, I feel something I thought I'd lost forever: hope. This is my new chapter, a story not defined by betrayal or loss, but by resilience, growth, and the love I've chosen to surround myself with. And for the first time in a long time, I'm excited to see where it takes me.